people are massively biased in favor of the status quo and the law, right? And like they do way too little of it. And so in the United States, we designed a system like which is pretty good, or the people who founded the country designed a system that's pretty good, which involves that if you want to punish somebody, if the government wants to punish somebody for doing something, they have to go through a jury, and the jury is made up of ordinary people who do not work for the government. And that is crucial, right? Because people who work for an organization just like almost automatically have a strong bias in favor of that organization. So a permanent government employee is going to support the laws made by the government. Okay, but you have to go through a jury. You have to convince 12 ordinary people that this person deserves to be punished for the thing that they did.
Okay, I'm here with Mike Huemer. Mike, thank you so much for coming. I'm a big fan of yours. And I read every time your blog. Your blog is I get lots of value from it, and it's very simple. Very well written.
Oh, thanks.
So yeah, thank you for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's good to meet you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about free will first.
Yeah.
Why do you think the question of free will is so controversial and one of the most enduring topics in philosophy?
Yeah. Why is it controversial? I guess there are a lot of confused people. Maybe that's the reason. Maybe there's a bias in favor of determinism. Okay, you might think, oh well, is this just like frivolously calling any alternative view a bias? Could you just say that about any view that you don't agree with? But it does actually look like there's some kind of bias for determinism, because if you look historically at the challenges to free will, even the people today who reject free will would not think that the past challenges to free will were serious. Okay, so in ancient times, people were worried that we didn't have free will because the fates, right? These supernatural beings called the fates were planning everything. Right, and then during the Middle Ages, people started to worry that we didn't have free will because of astrology, because you can predict everything about somebody's life from astrology. Okay, and then a little bit later, they were thinking we didn't have free will because God is all-knowing, and therefore God knows everything that you're going to do ahead of time. And if you believe in God, that's a much better argument. But there wasn't really any evidence that actually God was all-knowing and all that. Okay. So anyway, and then after that, then the early 20th century, people were saying, oh, we don't have free will because psychologists can predict everything. And that was never true. That was never remotely close to true. Like a psychologist could look at your childhood and predict everything about how you're going to turn out. No, they cannot. Okay, anyway, so, but now there are people who are saying, oh, you don't have free will because physics. Okay, so if you just view that as one in this line, and you think, okay, and now why would there be a bias for determinism? I don't know. I'm just guessing stuff. Okay, but it could be that a lot of people don't actually want to be responsible. Like maybe we don't want to be responsible for things because then we could be to blame for things, right? We don't want to be responsible because sometimes we're screwing things up. So
yeah, and are philosophers agreeing more?
Do they agree more than ordinary people do? I mean, ordinary people probably don't think about it.
No, are philosophers with time? Are philosophers agreeing more?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. There's a survey, the Phil Papers survey, that surveyed the opinions of philosophers about many philosophical questions, but I don't know what the result was about free will. But it doesn't appear that there's much agreement about it.
Okay, right. But in this way, I would measure, like, if there's a truth, either we have free will or not. So if philosophers were agreeing more, because they are converging, they are searching for the same truth. So if they were agreeing more, it would be a sign, I guess, that they would getting closer to the truth, but it doesn't seem to be the case.
Yes.
So
right, yeah.
What's your argument here?
The argument for free will? Well, I mean, one of my arguments is that the denial of free will is a self-defeating position. Um, okay, so yeah, you asked what my argument for free will was. So I argue that the denial of free will is a self-defeating position. All right, and this starts with realizing that a whole lot of things that we do and say and think presuppose free will. All right, so most obviously, deliberation presupposes free will. So it doesn't make sense to deliberate about what to do if you don't think you have any choice. If you don't think there's more than one alternative, or you don't think that you have control over which alternative is realized, then it doesn't make sense to deliberate. Okay, also, wouldn't make sense to talk about the reasons for and against doing something if there's only one thing that you could do. Wouldn't make sense to give people advice. Wouldn't make sense to talk about what people should or shouldn't do. Various reactive attitudes, as philosophers say, would not make sense. So it wouldn't make sense to blame people or to feel regret or pride or praise people. Okay, so all of that. And all of that is just, all of those things are built into ordinary life, things that we're doing constantly. Okay, and now when I say these things presuppose free will, I'm not saying that these things could not happen if you didn't have free will. I'm saying that the person who's doing these things is assuming that they have free will.
Right.
So if you're doing these things, you're assuming that you have free will. Okay, and then the second thing to realize is that the people who are advocating for determinism are also doing those things. So it wouldn't make sense to deliberate about whether to accept free will or determinism unless you already think that you have free will. So in the whole process of reasoning, you're presupposing that you already have free will. Among other things, I claim that there's a presupposition of rational discourse that we ought to refrain from believing falsehoods. We ought to avoid the false, prefer true over false beliefs. I think that if you don't accept that, then you can't be engaged in rational discourse or reasoning. Okay, but that presupposes that you have some kind of alternatives. You have a choice about what to believe or how to think, and so on.
Right. Yeah, I think if we have free will or not, we still have to live our lives on the assumption that we do, because the problem is that we all have experience of making up our minds, of deciding something, like a candidate to an election. We can think of arguments for votes against that candidate, and we can think of arguments to votes for that candidate in the same candidate. So I think the casual gap is between the reasons and the decisions, and it seems that the evidence of the gap is what gives us the experience that we have free will. So even if we assume that free will is an illusion, we still have to make up our minds every day and make decisions, because we can just go to a restaurant and the waiter asks what we're going to have, and we just say, oh wait, I'm a determinist, let's see what happens. We can't even organize a society that doesn't live assuming it has free will, right?
Yeah, what would society be like if we never talk about what anyone should do? And nobody ever gets blamed for anything, nor do they get praised for anything. Nobody asks for advice or gives advice. What's that going to be like?
Yeah.
Okay, but the anti-free will people often say, oh, well, you see, I have an explanation for everything. It's that free will is an illusion. Okay. And they think this is such a great thing to say. This is such a great point. No, that's just like what anybody could say about anything that seems obvious that they want to deny. Anytime you're denying the obvious, you could always say, it's an illusion. Okay. So oh, there's a desk in front of me. And if I want to just say the desk isn't there, I could go, oh, it's an illusion. And okay, now if I had an account of this illusion, it could make more sense. When you put a stick halfway in water, there's an optical illusion because the light is bent. Okay, but there's an explanation of this.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not just saying it's an illusion because I want to deny the evidence of my senses, right? And the anti-free will people, usually they're just saying it's an illusion because they just want to deny free will. They don't usually have an account of how this illusion works, or evidence for why you should think that it's an illusion instead of that everything is the way it obviously seems.
Yeah, it's a very easy to vary explanation. can apply that to everything. But about your principle, a guy called Mark Young wrote a blog post trying to refute your arguments. His argument turned out to be invalid, but he makes a good point. So the first premise is we should believe only the truth. But in an earlier blog post of yours on foundationalism, you said, and I'm quoting, "Do you think you have at least one false belief? If you're rational, you answered yes. It follows that your beliefs are inconsistent since they can't all be true." So this seems to contradict the first premise using the should implies can principle. So we get from the first premise that we can believe the truth, yet the quote claims that we can't believe only the truth and yet be rational, since the first argument is meant to be a conditional on rational discourse. It kind of seems that we can only engage in rational discourse if we are not rational.
So I don't really see what the problem is. People are imperfect, and they should admit that they are imperfect, right? And like much the same is true about practical rationality. Like, do you think that you've ever done a wrong action? I bet you have.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't show that wrong actions are not wrong. So if I put forward the principle, you should not do things that are wrong, I hope you would agree with that, because that's true by definition, by the meaning of the word wrong. Okay, but I bet nevertheless you have done at least one wrong thing in your life, right? So like admitting to imperfection, that doesn't create any inconsistency, right? And you're also probably epistemically imperfect. So I bet you've made some mistakes. And you probably have made some mistakes that you haven't yet discovered. And, the reason I think that is that that's been true of every other human being. Every other human being in the world and in history has made at least one mistake. So I've probably made one too. I don't know what it is. Okay, now that doesn't mean that it's not a mistake. It doesn't mean that I should have done it, right? Like whatever the mistake is, I shouldn't have done it. But yeah, you see what I mean?
Right. Okay, yeah, that's fair. Why do you think your argument that this argument it's so rejected by philosophers? And you said that it was rejected by journals 15 times, right? Because that is not typical of Mike Huemer, right?
Yeah. Most of my papers are only rejected 3 or 4 times before being accepted. And that one it was just rejected so many times. And I think many people, when they hear the argument, think that it's some kind of trick. And because everybody knows that you can't prove like a major philosophical thesis that's been debated for 2,000 years, you can't have a proof that one thesis on that is correct. And the way that I phrased it in the paper was sharper than what I said verbally, right? There was like a numbered series of steps that goes, 1, we should believe only what's true. 2, whatever should be done can be done. If determinism is true, then whatever can be done is done. Therefore, if determinism is true, then whatever should be done is done. Therefore, if determinism is true, then we only believe what's true. I believe that I have free will. Therefore, the belief in free will is true. Okay, so if determinism, then free will. Okay, and then, this is assuming the determinist is rejecting free will, so it would be an incoherent position. Okay, but so, and when you phrase it like that, it looks like it's a proof of free will, like just a deductive proof. And then everybody thinks that, that's just some kind of cute trick that you're playing. And then they look for rationalizations. So they don't try to see how I could be right, because they have an intuitive reaction that it must be a trick. They just try to find something to reject about it. And if a philosopher is looking for something to reject, they will generally find something.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I would revise the paper and put a response to the objection and then send it out again. And then the next person would just come up with some other thing. And then I put a response to that, and the next person would say some other thing. Okay. So anyway, at the end, it wound up with several responses to objections, but still nobody was going to accept it.
Okay, yeah. So I have a question about the doctrine of hopes. So in short, his doctrine teaches that the man is free in that he has the liberty to do if he wills and to do what he wills, as far as there are no external impediments. But he is not free to will or to choose his will. This seems to push the conversation about free will more to the acts of will. So how do you interpret this distinction between do you think it dissolves or deepens the paradoxes that tend to haunt the free will debates?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's called the freedom of the will rather than freedom of action, because the thought is that your willing should be free. And I guess so. I think most philosophers in the Western tradition who wrote about free will are compatibilists, including Hobbes. So most of them, they thought they could explain free will by saying something like you're free if there aren't any external impediments preventing you from doing what you want, or maybe you're free if you could do a variety of different things if you tried or if you wanted to, or something like that. Okay, and those things are compatible with the truth of determinism. Okay, so it could be that there are no external impediments, but that everything is predetermined. Just like what you do could be determined by internal forces as opposed to external forces. Like that was a popular thing for the compatibilists to say. This view of free will just doesn't really capture our intuitions about freedom. Okay, so suppose that you have a robot that is, so it's controlled by its computer brain and it's running an algorithm, which is what computers do. Okay, there's no random element in it. It's just a completely deterministic algorithm. And so it just does whatever the program dictates at any given point in time. Does it have free will? So intuitively not, because there are not alternative possibilities. There's only ever one thing that it can do.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, but it could be true that the robot didn't have external impediments. Right? And it could be true that the robot can do what it wants or something like that. It could do what it wills. Right? But intuitively, there's something more that's needed, which is there has to be more than one alternative. That's possible. If there's only one alternative, then you feel like, well, you're on this track where everything is predetermined, right? That doesn't really seem like freedom. Okay, and so there's arguments about this in the literature, but here's an example I gave one time that okay, so suppose that Congress is interviewing this climate expert. Okay, and this climate scientist is explaining that, when you release CO2 into the atmosphere, it takes 50 years for it to get to the upper atmosphere where it has its maximum effect. Okay, and so, when the Congress people says, Mr. Scientist, could you tell us what we can do right now to stop any further global warming? And the scientist says, well, in order to prevent any further global warming, we would have to have stopped CO2 emissions 50 years ago. And we did not do that. Okay, now what follows from that? What is the answer to the congressman's question? Right? Congressman wanted to know what we could do to stop global warming. Anybody can figure out that the implication is we cannot stop further global warming because something would have to have happened in the past that did not happen.
Yeah.
Okay. If determinism is true, then in order for you to do anything different from what you actually do, stuff would have to have happened in the past that did not happen. Right? Because that's kind of what determinism means, right? That given a complete characterization of the past, there's only one future. There's only one future that's consistent with the way the past went and the laws of nature. Okay. So, the past would have to have gone differently than it did, so you can't do anything different. Okay. Well, if you can't do anything different from what you're actually doing, then you're not free.
Right. Okay. What do you make of the argument that many people say, if I didn't even got the chance to consciously be here, to exist, how do I get a chance to do anything else? What makes me? If I make the choices that's because everything starts when we born, the causality. So it starts from there. So if I didn't got the chance to be a person making the choices I make, whether they are determined or not, in what sense am I free?
Well, I guess part of what you might be asking is about there are preconditions for you to perform actions, and you don't have control over those preconditions. So, okay, well, you had to be created in the world, and then you have to have certain minimal mental capacities, and you can't give yourself those capacities because you have to already have them in order to do anything. So, you have to have consciousness and intelligence and something like that. And actually, when you're a child, you might not have free will, or you might have less freedom because you have less ability to control yourself. Okay. But none of that stops you from having freedom, right? Having free will doesn't mean controlling everything, right? Or even everything relevant to your action. It just means controlling something. Okay, and is this really what the view is? Yes. The debate really is the hard determinists are saying no one has the slightest control over anything whatsoever. It's the hard determinists who are taking the completely extreme position. And the free will believers are only saying, no, sometimes we can control something, right? Or, sometimes there's at least more than one alternative. Not always, not every alternative you want, but sometimes there's at least two things, and you have control over which one is realized, okay? So it's not a condition on that you have created yourself, right? Okay, now, a part of the threat might be that the determinist thinks that, well, you're born with a particular character and psychological characteristics and maybe brain characteristics, and maybe the determinist thinks that those things uniquely determine what you do. So then you would have to have control over those things in order to have control over your actions, allegedly. But I don't think that those things uniquely determine what you do. Okay. I think there are many times when there's more than one thing that could happen that's compatible with your prior state.
Okay, right, yeah. Let me introduce meditation and introspection here. So the goal of most meditators is to reach enlightenment or awakening, which is a transformative state of awareness or realization. And it's often also described as seeing the true nature of reality. And most meditators claim that there's no such thing as the self, and the self is an illusion, even though we all experience a sense of self. And they think that the idea of self and the concept of free will is tightly linked. So the way they seem to argue is that the dissolving of the self reinforces the view that there is no thinker or I inside my head. And the more closely we observe this process, the more we are sure that thoughts just arise randomly, come and go. And it's rather a theater where thoughts come than a control center where we can choose what to think about, for instance. So what we call free will might just be consciousness witnessing decisions and that have already been made in the past, right? So how do you engage with this claim? Do you think there's anything to the idea that introspection reveals the illusion of self, or does it rely too much on a particular interpretive framework about what awareness really shows?
Yeah. So I really don't know what these people are talking about. So, and it doesn't seem like they can explain it, or they're very good at explaining it. What do you mean by the self being an illusion? So if there's an illusion, who is undergoing the illusion? Okay, if there's no self, there's no one to be under an illusion. And there's nobody to be having any experiences. So there must not be any experiences. So none of this is happening. It's it seems like this is sort of denying the core thing, that the one last thing that Descartes thought couldn't be doubted, right? That Descartes correctly thought you couldn't have reason for doubting. Okay, but I think, well, maybe that's not what they mean, right? They say there's no self. Maybe they don't mean that actually nobody is having any experiences, right? Because I just can't make sense of that. Sometimes I think what they actually mean is, well, a lot of the characteristics that you think are essential to yourself are not.
Mm.
Which in fact I agree with, right? So people might think, like maybe they think their race is essential to them, or their sex, or whatever, some personality traits they have, and like a lot of those things are not essential. So, maybe if you had been exposed to different hormones in the womb, you'd be a woman now, right? Because that's what determines sex differentiation.
Mhm.
Okay, and then you just like you might have a different personality and many other different characteristics, different experiences. So I don't think those things are impossible, but that doesn't mean there's no self. It just means that some of the things that people thought were essential to themselves are not,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
And yeah,
Yeah, have you heard Sam Harris on Free Will? Because I know you like him, right?
yeah, I like Sam Harris. Yeah, and I've heard him talk about it a little bit, but um, I don't think I've heard all that he has to say about it. So
Okay, right. So yeah, while
I did,
researching about this, I actually found an interesting argument against this, that basically, while agreeing that our thoughts arise spontaneously, this guy suggested that meditation and introspection actually gives us a degree of freedom by developing our capacity to consciously relate to and work with mental contents. So like through practices like mindfulness, we can cultivate better self-understanding.
yes,
So like perhaps meditation reveals both the mechanical nature of thoughts and our capacity to develop a meaningful form of mental autonomy.
yeah, good. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I remember the other thing that they no self people might be meaning, which is people underestimate how much is unconscious. So, like, you think that you're doing a lot of stuff, but most of what you do depends upon a lot of unconscious processing. So, your brain has to be doing stuff that you aren't aware of and couldn't be aware of, right? And then you think that you're responsible for everything, right? So, and I think that that's true, but again, that doesn't mean that you don't have freedom. Okay, but then the last thing that you said brings up the fact that it is possible to increase your freedom. So there could be degrees of freedom. So, you have free will or you don't. Either you have no free will at all or you have at least some free will. But if you have at least some freedom, then you can like do things to increase your freedom. And what would that mean? It's something like to have freedom requires having at least more than one alternative. And you have control over which alternative is realized.
Mm.
And it seems like your degrees of control comes in degrees. And you could have more control if you're more aware of the unconscious influences.
Mm.
Okay, because many people are under unconscious influences that cause them to do things that they wouldn't approve of if they understood why they were actually doing them. So like if you know that some of your decisions are being biased by factors that you consider irrelevant, right? Then maybe you would stop doing those things, right? Okay, but if you're not aware of the biases, then you would wind up doing things that, right? It's not fully free, right? It's not fully under your control because it's not fully what your better judgment would approve of, right?
You're right. Yeah, and I mean, the degrees of freedom, we can also see that from a kind of moral perspective, that the more things you believe, the more beliefs you have. Like, I'm racist, I'm against LGBT, I'm socialism. That's all like gonna conditionate your behavior. So probably the least beliefs you have, maybe the more you'll be able to enjoy your freedom.
Oh, the less beliefs you have. Well, it depends on whether your beliefs are, let's say, reflective, right? Whether
Yeah.
they're explained by reasons that you would approve of on reflection. So, and if they are, then that's good, and then you'll be able to make decisions based on them, and those will be free. But if they're influenced by biases that you wouldn't approve of, then you're going to be less free.
Right.
And I believe maybe meditation does improve your awareness of the unconscious influences on your attitudes, and so then maybe that does increase your freedom. I haven't actually done it, so I can't say that much about it.
Okay. Okay. Right. let's talk about philosophical anarchism and also anarcho-capitalism and morality. So let me try to do a soft transition. So free will underpins the idea that people are moral agents, so capable of making choices and bearing responsibility for them. So if people are truly autonomous agents, as free will suggests, then any system that claims authority over them must justify itself to those agents. This is like the core of philosophical anarchism, and the view that no state or institution can or has the intrinsic moral authority over free individuals unless justified by compelling moral arguments. So the move becomes, if individuals are truly free and morally responsible for their actions, on what basis can any external authority legitimately coerce them?
Yeah. Well, so like the connection between free will and political freedom is maybe weaker than that, right? So if you believe in free will, it doesn't follow that you support political freedom. But if you support political freedom, like it's pretty hard to think that political freedom is valuable if you don't believe in free will. Because it's sort of like it's sort of like a, I don't know, like a precondition for having any kind of freedom, that you have this most basic kind of freedom, like the ability to make your own decisions and control your own decision. So anyway, but okay, never mind that. A foundational problem of political philosophy, and just like a problem about society, is why do we have one group of people telling everybody else what to do? Like, why do they get to do that? And why should the rest of us listen to them? Right? So we have 535 people in Washington who are making up rules for everybody else. And then everyone acts like they have to do what those people say. Why? And if I decide to make up rules for everybody else doesn't obey me. And if I decide I'm going to enforce my rules, i.e. I hire people with guns to go around like threatening people to make them do what I say, and then like once in a while I like have somebody kidnapped because they didn't do what I said, and then I lock them in a cage somewhere, like people are going to think that I'm crazy and possibly evil, and then it would be a horrible crime. But that's what the government is doing. Okay, so why do they get to do that? And my answer to this fundamentally is, well, there is no good reason. Actually, they don't have the right to do that. They don't have any special rights that the rest of us don't have, right? And now, I want to sort of qualify that. So I think that it is okay for someone to use force in order to protect people's rights. So if you're aware of somebody who is violating other people's rights, you can use force to stop them. And you don't need to be a special person to do that. If you see somebody committing a crime, like you or I could stop that person by force, I think. And so I also think the government could do that. That would be okay. Right? But there are some things that you and I couldn't do. We wouldn't be justified in exercising force against other people. And I think also the government shouldn't do those things either. Right? Because I think they're not special. They should be subject to the same moral constraints as the rest of us.
Yeah, right. What's the difference between philosophical anarchism and political anarchism?
Yeah, so these are technical terms in political philosophy. These things are not well named, okay? But anyway, philosophical anarchism is the view that nobody has an obligation to obey the law merely because it is the law. Okay, but that's compatible with your having an obligation to obey the law, right? Because the second part of it was merely because it's the law. Okay, so if the law says don't murder, you still have an obligation to not murder anyone. But the reason you shouldn't murder anyone isn't that it's the law, right? You shouldn't murder people because, life is valuable, people have rights, whatever, something like that. Not because the law says you shouldn't murder them, okay? So the philosophical anarchist could be, they could agree with the content of most of the laws, but, if there's a law that doesn't correspond to independently existing moral constraints, then you don't have to follow it, okay? Mm-hmm. The political anarchists are the people who think we would actually... there would actually be a better society that didn't have a government. Like the best social organization would not have a government. Okay, so now that doesn't necessarily mean that we should immediately abolish the government because, if we just immediately tear down everything, we might wind up with a society that was worse. The anarchist is not saying every anarchic society is better than every society with a government, but they're just saying like the best society, which would be possible to human beings, would not have a government.
Okay.
Right. So, and by the way, the reason why these are bad terms is the term, like, it makes it sound like the first doctrine is a philosophical doctrine and the other one isn't, and that the second one is about political doctrine and not philosophical. But they're both philosophical and they're both political. Right? Like philosophical anarchism and political anarchism are both philosophical views and they're both political views. So this is I don't know why that's the name for these views.
Right. So in the political anarchism world, the idea that the world will be better without a state, it seems like we have to take into account that people are used to live in a state, right? So it would probably require a kind of psychological preparation to this transition.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the reasons why we can't have anarchy right now is that almost no one believes in it. Right. So I don't know what percentage of people are anarchists, but it's in the low single digits, right? Like maybe 1 or 2% or something like that. So, and therefore, if somehow the government vanished today, the first thing that would happen is people would immediately start setting up another government. And they would be able to do it because 99% of people would agree with the people who are trying to do that. Okay. So that's why we can't have it. All right. But it's not inevitable. So there's a coherent theory about how a society could work without a central authority structure. And if more people knew about that theory and knew why it was a good theory and were convinced of it, then it would be possible to have a stable anarchic society, right? Okay, and so people need to read my book.
Yeah,
we need more people to read
that's
my
the
book.
inside.
Lesson of this.
But what holds people back? Because I'm guessing like the first impression people get when, like, I say we should live in a stateless society, it's like, you're crazy. How could exist order in a stateless society? Or it's impossible because
Yeah.
Do you think it's a matter of time until people realize that this is actually a good idea, or?
Yeah, I mean, I was hypothesizing that. Now, it doesn't sound like a likely prediction because like anarchism is so far out of favor right now. So I say, yeah, eventually most people will accept anarchism. That sounds like a pretty implausible, wild prediction. And like I don't have any direct evidence for that. Like my only evidence is that, well, it's a good theory, and over time, people tend to figure out things. So, like over time, human beings' beliefs improve, and that's true in every area. Like every area of human intellectual endeavor, we improve. And so, if I'm right that this is the best political theory, then it will probably eventually be accepted. But it might take a long time. So the reason why most people do not accept this is that they have no idea what the theory is. Like most people have never heard the anarchist theory. So all they've heard is there's some crazy people who want to abolish the government. That's it. And most people think that they understand how society works. They think that they understand how the government works, but they have no idea how an anarchic society would work. Okay, and what they think they understand about how the government works is like mostly false. Like it's full of all sorts of errors that serve the government. So like they have a much more optimistic view about how government works than the reality. And then they have a much more pessimistic view about how anarchy works because they have no idea what the actual theory is, right?
Right. So how would they transition to an anarchist or anarcho-capitalist state look like? Because like you were saying, it can be like tomorrow people would be setting a new government. So how would this transition work?
Yeah, so the best thing that I could come up with is we could start outsourcing the duties of the government. Right, and so this doesn't sound that hard. So we have government police that are patrolling most areas of the country, or I don't know, well, whether they're patrolling or not, they're responsible for security in most of the country. But also, there are many private security guards in the country. Actually, there are more private security guards than there are government police. the government could start outsourcing policing duties to private security guard companies. And there are actually some places where the government hires private security guards instead of using government police, probably because it's cheaper. All right, so we could just start doing that more, and we could have a system where particular small areas of the city get to decide what security guard company is patrolling them, and it's crucial that there be significant competition. So if the government just awards a contract to one company, then that creates just all of the problems of monopolies. That doesn't improve anything, right? There has to be competition. That's the whole point about capitalism. Okay, that's the key to the advantages. Okay, so there have to be multiple different security guard companies, and then they compete to try to get contracts for protecting a particular neighborhood or a particular building or whatever. Okay, and then if that works out, okay, then we could do more and more, and then maybe eventually there could be no government police. Okay, and then the second thing is the court system. We could start outsourcing the court system's duties to private arbitration companies. There are right now many private arbitration companies where you can go to have a dispute resolved instead of in the government court. It's much faster and it's much cheaper, and it gives you comparable results. Okay, so we could just expand the use of that, and then maybe eventually we'd realize that we didn't need government courts at all. Right, so those are the initial steps.
Right. Isn't a little unrealistic to achieve a stateless society through democratic means? Because before you choose to radically reduce the power of the governments, you need to be elected. So you need political power, but a true anarcho-capitalist rejects power, and it's quite ironic. It's vote for me, I'm going to hand up the system which you used to vote.
Yeah. Maybe the libertarian candidates will promise to disband their own office. Well, if most people were convinced that these things I'm suggesting were good ideas, then they could get the politicians to do them because the politicians want to be popular, right? And for a while, after people were getting upset about the police, in the BLM movement after they killed George Floyd, I was thinking, oh, this is a great time for people to realize that we should outsource policing. We shouldn't have the government doing this anymore. We should have private security guards. Do you ever hear stories about private security guards murdering people? They don't do that shit, okay? Because they know they would get in serious trouble, right? So, okay. Anyway, but I don't know, not that many people took that up. There were people who were saying we should defund the police, but they weren't saying, and hire private security guards. It was they were saying, let's just not have any security at all. So anyway, okay, but anyway, that's at least a possible thing that could happen. People could become sufficiently dissatisfied with the police that they realize that they should have, competing private companies doing it. The court system is just so expensive, and it's so just time consuming and annoying that there is some pressure for people to go to private alternatives. All right, so that's my hope.
Right. So you were saying before that
it's probably not.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it probably wouldn't happen because of people being ideological libertarians. Right? There's a bunch of libertarians who would want to do these things just ideologically, but then there's just a bunch of normies. But, there might be a bunch of normies who realize that, man, going to court is so expensive. It takes so long. You spend years and $100,000 to resolve a dispute. Isn't there some better way? I don't want to spend that much money. And then they realize that they could have arbitration, right? So that would be the motivation, actual practical benefits. And maybe some normal people who are not ideological libertarians would realize that, yeah, the cops aren't doing that great of a job of stopping crime, right? It's not that great. Actually, most crimes, they never make an arrest for. Actually, most crimes, they don't even investigate. If you report that somebody stole your stuff, they're not going to get it back. Right? They're not going to find the person who did it. And they're not going to make a serious effort either. Unless the crime that you reported was a murder or a rape, they're not going to make serious efforts to find the person.
Yeah, so you've defended that morality must always come before the law, and most people think wrongly that law safeguards morality, which is completely nonsensical, and rather say we can look back in the past and there were laws enforcing slavery. So how should we kind of design our justice system according to this view? Like, because in a sense, we can, by prioritizing morality, it can open doors to endless civil disobedience because everyone thinks they are on the right side of the truth or moral truth.
Yeah. Well, so the concern that people have when I say this kind of thing is overblown and unrealistic. The concern of most of the people who support deferring to the law is, oh yeah, like everybody is people are just going to like be randomly rejecting perfectly normal good laws, and like just like overusing civil disobedience or overusing jury nullification or whatever. And like all of the evidence is the opposite. Like people are massively biased in favor of the status quo and the law, right? And like they do way too little of it. And so in the United States, we designed a system like which is pretty good, or the people who founded the country designed a system that's pretty good, which involves that if you want to punish somebody, if the government wants to punish somebody for doing something, they have to go through a jury, and the jury is made up of ordinary people who do not work for the government. And that is crucial, right? Because people who work for an organization just like almost automatically have a strong bias in favor of that organization. So a permanent government employee is going to support the laws made by the government. Okay, but you have to go through a jury. You have to convince 12 ordinary people that this person deserves to be punished for the thing that they did. And if you convince the people, convince the 12 people, then you get to punish the person. So like that's a pretty good system. Okay, and then you might have the worry, oh, well, will juries just be like nullifying the murder laws? Will it be like some evil jury that says murder is okay? No, like that's highly improbable. All right, now, indeed, there could be cases, there are bad jury decisions. Okay, that's true. There are also bad judge decisions. There are also bad legislator decisions. Like, why is this a greater concern? Right? Like, so sometimes a jury might wrongly acquit somebody because they're bad, but also sometimes they will rightly acquit somebody who would have been wrongly convicted by a judge, right? If judges were in charge. The problem, though, is so what I'm describing, I think, is exactly what was intended when the people who wrote the U.S. Constitution included the right to a jury trial. I think they intended exactly what I'm saying, that you should only be punished if 12 ordinary people agree as a matter of their moral judgment that you deserve to be punished. Okay, in spite of that, basically judges have taken over the system and sort of like co-opted the power of the jury. So judges will regularly, when they bring the jury in, they will regularly basically just lie to the jury and tell them that they're not supposed to exercise moral judgment, right? Which completely defeats the point of having a jury, right? But the judges will tell them, only judge as a factual matter whether the person violated the law. And by the way, don't even try to interpret the law. If you have any questions about how to interpret the law, ask me and I will tell you how to interpret it. Okay, so don't exercise any judgment. Just look at the facts, okay? And like that's what judges do, and then most people believe them that that's what they're supposed to do. And so jury nullification is actually rare. It's a lot rarer than it should be.
Okay, great. Let's talk about progress. How do we keep a society stable while still making rapid progress? Because like it seems like progress needs freedom and disruption, but stability needs rules and order. So how can both coexist without one destroying the other?
Well, I guess we need a balance between the two. I guess my answer is that the free market will make the optimal balance, and the reason for that being that consumers value stability, but they also value getting better stuff, and they value both of these. So there's some optimal balance point between those two, and businesses will have an incentive to find that balance, right? There's some. There are industries that have progressed very fast, so the tech industries. And I think the reason there's been a lot of progress and productivity boosts in the tech sector is that the government didn't regulate it very much. And the reason for that was that the people in the government were sort of like old people who didn't understand it. And so, like, because like there are all of these 70-year-old senators and stuff like that. They didn't know what was going on, so they didn't try to regulate it. So then it had huge progress. And so, like, that's the way most industries would be. There'd be more progress, in the rest of the economy if we had less interference.
Right. Okay, yes. So you also have lots of opinions and book on ethical vegetarianism with a foreword by Peter Singer. How
Yeah.
how is it possible? Okay, yeah.
Everybody should buy that book.
Yeah. How is it possible that we've been doing so much moral progress since times like slavery was normal and people just threw slaves to fight until death in the arena, or like the racist era in the US during the Civil War? But at one point in the book, you say that the impact of factory farming rivals the suffering of all humans that have ever existed. So how is it possible that in the same world, the same world has been undergoing tremendous moral progress, but this atrocity of factory farming is actually increasing?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So just to fill that in more for the listeners, like the reason why I said that, the harm of factory farming rivals all of the suffering in all of human history. The reason I said that is that we're killing something like 84 billion animals a year for food. And almost all of them are on factory farms, where everyone who looks at the conditions on factory farms agrees that they're inhumane. Like nobody looks at that and says, yeah, they seem like they're having a fine time. No, like there are conditions that if you were subjected to them, you'd say that you'd been tortured.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, so like 84 billion a year. And there have only ever been 110 billion humans in history. Okay, if you had to live on a factory farm for 3 months, that would be the worst experience of your life. Okay, and so that's happening 84 billion times, and then so in a couple of years, that happens to more creatures than the total number of humans who have ever lived on the Earth. Okay, so it's plausible that the total amount of suffering that we cause in a few years is comparable to the total amount of all human suffering. So okay, and like, and yet there's been moral progress in a number of areas, like. Slavery used to be widely practiced throughout human history in many different societies. By the way, it was not invented by Americans. It was not invented by white people, right? When the white people got to Africa, Africans were enslaving each other. And like a lot of the slave traders bought from African slave traders. Like they bought Africans from the other Africans. Right, so anyway, the widespread slavery throughout human history. And now it's illegal in every country in the world. Okay. Right, which does not necessarily mean that nobody does it. Okay, but it is a huge bit of progress that it is illegal everywhere. Okay. And then like whatever, in ancient Roman times, they used to force people to fight to the death for entertainment because they thought that was fun. Like seeing people chop each other into pieces, that would be entertaining. Okay, so we don't do that anymore. Okay, and then you just list like multiple different areas in which there's been huge progress, moral progress, like we've gotten better. And yet there's like, we didn't have factory farming, and that the badness of that, like 100 years ago we didn't have factory farming. The badness of that basically just outweighs everything else. Okay, but so how could that be? Well, it's not because we're becoming morally worse. The reason we didn't have factory farming in the past wasn't that human beings cared about the interests of animals. They never cared about the interests of animals, like not any more in the past than they do today. It's just that they were less efficient. Right? So while having the same degree of moral turpitude and not caring about other species, we just got more economically efficient. We found out that this is the most efficient way of getting the most meat for the least amount of money. So that's what happened. But okay, and why is this the last area like for progress to occur? Right? Like we used to not respect the rights of people of other races, and not respect the men would not respect the rights of women, and people in one country wouldn't respect the rights of the other countries, all that. And so, we expanded our circle of moral concern to different groups of humans. And basically the thing is that, well, other species are just more different. from us, and it's easier to empathize with beings who are similar to yourself, right? So at first, it was like the people who were in power would sympathize with their own group. And so, like, if your society is run by white men, then the white men would sympathize with other white men, and then they would design the rules of the society around that. Okay, but then they gradually became, sympathetic to other people who were less similar to themselves. But then other species are just way more different than other groups of humans. So it's just like harder for us to try to take their perspective.
Interesting. Okay. Do you see the seeds of moral progress happening now? Like, in the sense that moral progress is real, and 100 years ago, things were vastly different from how they are now. So, what are things that you think might change 100 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious thing is the treatment of other species. Like, we treat the animals from other species as, I don't know, like the way that psychopaths treat other people, right? Just like totally disregard them, just like, totally use them as means, whatever, torture and kill them just for minor convenience. That's what psychopaths would do to us normal people, and that's what normal people do to other animals. So that will probably change. What else? Another plausible thing is, like, we'll probably find better ways of dealing with criminals. We have a lot of people who are locked in cages. We're probably going to find a better thing to do, right? And by the way, like, I'm not saying right now that we should release those people, but I would like to have a way of rehabilitating them. We'll probably figure out ways of rehabilitating them, maybe, rather than, and just in the United States, we just have too many. This is particularly about the United States. We have like the highest incarceration rate in the world. It's right. It's the land of the free, but we have more people locked up than any other country. Okay, so we'll probably change that. There are probably other things that I'm not thinking of because I'm trapped in our time, and there are probably other things that will improve that I didn't realize needed to be improved, but that future people will.
Okay, right. So you have this amazing TED Talk, and if you've already written some blog posts on it about the irrationality of politics. So there you advocate that the biggest problem that humanity faces is human irrationality, because it's not nor climate change nor world poverty, because those problems are conditioned by our irrationality. But you also state that it's even in our self-interest to be irrational, because rationality demands effort, right? You just can't believe whatever you want to believe, and it requires effort to overcome your bias. And you make the point that the probability of someone changing the outcome of an election is close to zero, if not zero. So the expected rewards of human rationality in politics is insignificant, and people accept costs when the expected rewards exceed the exceeded costs. So from an individual point of view, not looking like from an individual inserted in a society, because in that case it's pretty obvious that a rational group will have better outcomes. So from an individual point of view, this is probably a silly question. Why should I be rational?
Yeah, good. Well, yeah, so I did kind of make that argument that, which is also in Kaplan's famous book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, that it could be in your interest to think irrationally, not to act irrationally, but to think irrationally. That is, to believe stuff that's not likely to be true given the evidence. And various things like maybe you want to fit into a social group where some political belief is popular, and so you have to adopt that political belief. But what if that belief is not supported by objective evidence? Then you have to sort of like self-deceive or something like that. Okay, so why should you be rational? And I mean, basically, my answer is that, well, it's morally wrong. It's morally wrong to think irrationally about social issues, because that's contributing to social problems and preventing us from solving them. And you should be a good person, okay? But by the way, like, the respects in which it's in your interests to think irrationally, I kind of think that those are not genuine interests. Right? So, like, you want to believe something because it makes you feel good. I don't think that that's a real interest. That's sort of like it's a real desire. It's a desire that you have, but it's not. You're not really better off for believing comforting falsehoods rather than believing the truth about how the world actually is. Right, but that's sort of like, I don't know, like a matter of philosophical judgment, or sort of my ethical intuition. Like the person who's constantly deceiving themselves, and they have positive affect because they've tricked themselves into believing the world is the way they want it to be. I I don't envy that person. I don't want to be that person. I don't think that they're better off than the person who's facing reality.
Okay, great. What's your favorite book?
Of all time, I don't know. I'm tempted to just list one of mine, and then people will have to buy that book.
Yeah, I'm gonna list your books in the show notes.
I don't think I have a unique favorite book, but I I have a lot of novels that I've enjoyed. And, so I think The Three Body Problem is a great work of science fiction.
Okay.
It's like one of the greatest science fiction novels ever. I think Isaac Asimov's Foundation series is also one of the greats of all time because I'm a science fiction fan.
Okay.
And what else? I don't know. Yeah. Descartes' Meditations is a great work of philosophy. That's sort of like, widely viewed as the beginning of the modern period of philosophy.
What's your favorite philosopher?
Me. And I suppose you would want me to pick my favorite non-self philosopher.
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure. Like I like Descartes because of his meditations. I like Thomas Reid as a common sense philosopher. And I like H.A. Pritchard because he was kind of like the founder of ethical intuitionism, right? Or one of the founders of ethical intuitionism in the 20th century. I like David Stove because he's such a hilarious writer. David Stove was an Australian philosopher. He's not that well known, but just read any of his books. They're just hilarious. He hilariously makes fun of other philosophers. So. Yeah.
Okay. What's the most important thing you've learned?
In my entire life?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I learned how to talk. So, like that was really important.
I never got that one.
But also like I learned how to control my body, like move my arms and legs. Like that happened, probably in my first year of life, and like that's super important. So that might be the most important thing.
And philosophically,
yeah,
a philosophical idea.
yeah, like okay, good, yeah. Well, there was like a Facebook discussion like some time ago where people were soliciting important philosophical ideas that everyone should learn, and then one suggestion was, well, people should learn Bayes' theorem and just Bayesian reasoning. And, yeah, that's pretty good. I think I really like my argument about reincarnation. That's my favorite argument. Is that I think everyone should learn, but the fact that everyone should learn that argument depends upon it being correct. Okay. Because I think that is a actually correct proof of reincarnation, and that's one of the most important like philosophical questions that people wonder about, like what happens to you after you die. Like I think everyone should know the correct, the proof of the correct answer to that.
You're right.
The truth of moral realism also very important.
Okay.
Because there's a bunch of nihilists. Obviously the phenomenal conservatism. Everyone should know about that. Right, which is the correct account of when beliefs are justified. Right, and that is needed to stop people from becoming crazy skeptics.
Okay. Okay, last question. What's the meaning of life?
I don't know. Partly because I don't know even what the phrase "the meaning of life" means. So maybe it's something like, "What's the purpose of life?" And then it's like, well, could there be a purpose to life in general? If there was a creator, then the creator could have had a purpose for making life, and then that could be the answer. But I'm not sure there is. So, but if there is a creator, maybe the purpose was just like, just the intrinsic value of life, right? Or maybe not the intrinsic value of life, but the intrinsic value of consciousness or something like that, or positive conscious experiences or something like that. Maybe that's the purpose. And then, like maybe there's a question that's in the neighborhood, which is something about like, oh, well, okay, but like, how can you make your life meaningful? And then I guess the answer is like, well, the way to make your life meaningful is to be dedicated to something other than just yourself. Right? So like if you're just living in a purely selfish way, then your life is basically meaningless. So care about something other than you, right? And have some kind of moral values and act according to them, right? And I feel like most people in our society do not have moral character, right? And like, so they will not do something difficult for moral reasons. They will not they won't have their own independent judgment. Like they'll go along with what the herd says. And I do kind of feel like that, well, that makes your life sort of less meaningful.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, right. So, try to have moral values and try to have character.
Yeah, I like those. Okay, Mike, thank you so much for coming. This was great. And appreciate your time and energy, and see you soon. Thanks, bud.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.